الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله.
إن كان تابع أحمد متوهبا فأنا المقر بأنني وهابي. أفي الشريك عن الإله فليس لي رب سوى المتفرد الوهابي. لا قبة ترجى ولا وثن ولا قبر له سبب من الأسباب. كلا ولا حجر ولا شجر ولا عين ولا نصب من الأنصاب. أيضا ولست معلقا لتميمة أو حلقة أو ودعة أو ناب برجاء نفع أو لدفع بلية. الله ينفعني ويدفع ما بي. والابتداع وكل أمر محدث في الدين ينكره أولو الألباب. أرجو بأني لا أقاربه ولا أرضاه دينا وهو غير صوابي.
If innovations were struggling for acceptance in the cosmopolitan metropoles of Ottoman Syria, then they were practically running riot in the Arabian Peninsula's interior. As with much of the Muslim world, 18th century Arabia had strayed far from the pure monotheism of the Abrahamic ideal. Many followers of the nominal Sunni schools had compromised their tawheed, especially through the shirkiyat of shrine religion in the peninsula housing Islam's two legitimate shrines at Mecca and Medina. The retro-Jahiliyyah practices that characterized the folk Islam of the tribes of Central Arabia were in many ways similar to the blasphemies that had bedeviled the Muslim world beyond the region's borders. The cult of saints that remain a hallmark of popular Sufism and Shiaism today were a feature of Arabian Islam of the time too, cults which revolved around the ritual visitation of tombs of the pious deceased, beseeching their dead occupants for help from within their graves, and placing faith in associated trinkets and talismans wherein incantations were inscribed and engraved. The religion of some Bedouin had regressed still further, with the outright deification of inanimate objects, stones and trees, and the rejection of belief in the resurrection. These matters are not in dispute. The archaeological and photographic record, historical accounts of travellers and diplomats, polemical and counter-polemical writings of the time, all attest to Arabia as being a denizen of oxymoronic Islamo-polytheism. Some neutral observers noted the absence of any organized religion at all, where Islam in the desert had been replaced with a superstition supermarket.
You would have also found a people steeped in sort of folk Islam. A version of Islam, you see this all over the Muslim world, that has taken on accretions, traditions, rites, customs, beliefs that are not technically part of the core doctrine of Islam. Things like, visiting tombs, looking for miracles, or intercession of the saints whose tombs those are between you and God, or, sacrifice, or amulets and magic and sorcery and all sorts of stuff that is sort of like this added layer on top of Islam.
Against such a reversion to idolatry rose a reformist movement referred to in scholarly circles as a Dawah an-Najdiyah, more commonly known to friend and foe alike as Wahhabism, Wahhabiyah, after its founder, Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab.
فصار أتباع هذه الدعوة ومن يدعو إلى توحيد الله من علماء التوحيد من علماء النجد يلقب بالوهابي، فهو لقب معروف شريف وليس بمستنكر، بل هو لقب لأهل التوحيد والإيمان، لأهل الدعوة إلى الله عز وجل. وهكذا انتشر هذا اللقب إذا رأوا من يدعو إلى الله ويبين حقيقة التوحيد وينهى عن الشرك.
Many take offense at the Wahhabi label due to its early pejorative use, such as the Ash'ari Mufti of Makkah, Ahmad Zaini Dahlan's
Fitnatul Wahhabiyya.
The followers of Ibn AbdulWahhab who carried the Najdi call prefer to call themselves Muwahhidun, unicists, monotheists. And while acknowledging its pejorative usage among ignoramai, Bin Baz took ownership of the label and suggested it should be worn with pride.
والمقصود من هذا كله أن هذه الدعوة وهذا اللقب لقب لمن دعا إلى توحيد الله، من دعا إلى توحيد الله وأنكر الشرك يسميه بعض الجهلة وهابي لجهلهم بالحقيقة وعدم علمهم بالحقيقة.
One of the later Imams of the Najdi Da'wah, who defended it with poetry and prose, was Sulaiman bin Sahman al-Najdi al-Hanbali. Like bin Baz would do a century later, Ibn Sahman chose not to take offense but ownership of the Wahhabi label when he titled one of his works
المواهب الربانية في الانتصار للطائفة المحمدية الوهابية والرد الدليل الشبهة الدحلانية.
My own usage is neither pejorative ala Dahlan nor counter-polemical ala Sulaiman bin Sahman. It's prosaic, academic. Now, if a poet's performative product is covered by artistic license, then the imperative to hold a preacher's honour inviolable is all the more demanding of our silence. Otherwise, we risk unfairly accusing the one inviting to Allah of instead willfully inviting to misguidance and innovation. So where a scholar's works can be given a charitable reading, we're expected to do just that, lest we be likened to the one described by Imam Shafi'i in his own poetry.
وعين الرضا عن كل عيب كليلة ولكن عين السخط تبدي المساوية ولست بهياب لمن لا يهابني ولست أرى للمرء ما لا يرى لي.
Here, I'm sorry to say, Yasir Qadi claims on Sheikh Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab's behalf that which he never said.
I need you to understand this, okay? He is saying that لا أعرف معنى لا إله إلا الله. I did not know the meaning of La ilaha illallah until Allah blessed me with this knowledge of Islam. And none of my scholars knew the meaning of La ilaha illallah. ما منهم رجل عرف ذلك. Okay? Ibn AbdulWahhab is admitting that he is the first person in human history to bring forth the type of theology that he is bringing forth.
Very shoddy. This is what Ibn AbdulWahhab, in his finest American accent, actually said.
And I'll tell you about myself. By Allah, besides whom there is no deity but He, I sought knowledge, and those who knew me believed I had knowledge. And that time, I did not know the meaning of La ilaha illallah, and nor did I know the religion of Islam before this good that Allah bestowed upon me. And likewise my teachers, there wasn't among them a man who knew this. So whoever claims there was from the scholars of Al-Arid, those who knew the meaning of La ilaha illallah, or knew the meaning of Islam before this time, or claimed about his sheikhs that one of them knew that, he has lied mightily, deceived the people, and praised himself for what he does not possess.
Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab is speaking of the understanding of Tawheed in his locale, among the scholars of his specific region, Al-Arid being the central region of the wider Najd region within the vast expanse of the Arabian Peninsula. He could not have intended the entire world, as he was unaware of the entire world. Arabic is a language of overstatement, even more than English is a language of understatement.
Ibn AbdulWahhab is admitting that he is the first person in human history to bring forth the type of theology that he is bringing forth. He has to do that because he can't quote the people that are necessary to be quoted.
In fact, we find Ibn AbdulWahhab's grandson quoting the Ottoman scholar Sana'ullah bin Sana'ullah al-Makki al-Halabi al-Hanafi in support of his grandfather's critique of what Halabi condemned as the stench of shirk of the istighatha he witnessed in Syria, as if its appearance was a recent phenomenon.
رسالته من أنفس الرسائل لأنه أولا حنفي ثانيا مكي ثالثا كان قبل زمان الشيخ محمد بن عبد الوهاب ورسالته من أنفع الرسائل وقد طبعت مؤخرا وكان فيها منها نقول مهمة في تيسير العزيز الحميد في شروح كتاب التوحيد وفي بعض رسائل المشايخ والردود ينقلون عنها.
And it was not just the condemnation of grave worship where Ibn AbdulWahhab had a recent Ottoman forerunner. In his understanding of La ilaha illallah, Ibn AbdulWahhab was also beaten to the punch by one of those Ottomans of the Birghivi Salafist leaning bunch. Muhammad Hamid or Humaid Mustafa Kafawi was a scholar from the Crimea who later immigrated to the Ottoman Empire proper, serving as judge in Jerusalem until his death in 1761. One of his works, a commentary of one of Imam Birghivi's treatises, explored the possible meanings of the negative La article in La ilaha illallah. Kafawi's commentary was published in digitized manuscript format only as recent as September 2022, and even then it's been miscatalogued as Turkic text. Reflecting on the La in the Islamic kalima, Kafawi rules out a monist meaning, that there is no existence except Allah's, as this is, quote,
of the most harmful of ideas,
and
of the beliefs of the Wujudiyya and philosophers, who are cursed by Allah, the angels, and the whole of mankind.
Kafawi also rules out the La as negating individuation, as this would merely distinguish Allah from other deities to whom humans may still ascribe uluhiyya, divinity, or worshipness. The meaning that Kafawi settles on is that the La in La ilaha illallah means there is no true divinity except Allah's, which is to say, as post-proto-Wahhabi Wahhabis would say, La ma'buda bihaqqin illallah. There is nothing worshipped in truth except Allah.
Well, Sheikh Muhammad preaches pure monotheism, Tawheed, usually translated as the unity of God or the oneness of God, but I think the best definition is pure monotheism, okay? God as singular. Anything that challenges that idea of God as singular, anything that elevates anything or anyone anywhere close to the status of God, would be a violation of pure monotheism, okay? This is one of the great fundamental ideas of Islam, of one God. It's a monotheist religion, and from the perspective of Sheikh Muhammad, and probably most Muslims today, it is the most monotheistic of religions. God is one.
Now, all the above is not to say there aren't aspects of the Najdi Dawah that won't still raise eyebrows, if not heart rates. Ibn AbdulWahhab's precise conceptualization of Tawheed and Shirk, the takfir that followed in its wake, and the jihad that was waged for its sake, might still make even a sympathetic Sunni do a double take. These are massively contentious issues, ones we won't shy away from critiquing and giving their due consideration, in due course of course. But first, before we evaluate Wahhabi theology in light of the Book and the Sunnah, it behoves us to explore the history of what really happened, and what Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab really achieved, and how, among the Ottoman elites, the Najdi trailblazers' teachings were privately received.
كان في نجد حركة علمية كتب عنها المؤرخون وكتاب السير. هذه الحركة العلمية طبعا قبل دعوة محمد بن عبد الوهاب رحمه الله كانت موجودة، تتميز يعني بنجد عموما، لكن كانت العيينة وأشيقر. نعم. فيها تميز من القضاة والعلماء. نعم. الحنابلة طبعا. الشيخ محمد رحمه الله ولد في العيينة.
ولد في العيينة سنة 1015 وتعلم على أبوه الشيخ عبد الوهاب بن سليمان بن علي، وثم رحل إلى الحجاز وتعلم هناك، رحل إلى الإحساء ثم البصرة، ثم عاد من حريملة ثم العيينة، ثم انتقل إلى الدرعية في زمن الإمام محمد بن سعود رحمه الله.
Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab had initially trained as a traditional Hanbali scholar before embarking upon a quest for further knowledge, studying at the feet of men from Morocco, Dagestan, Syria and India. The most impactful of his stopovers in search of knowledge was his sojourn at the city of the Prophet, Medina. The first of the two Madani scholars who took Ibn AbdulWahhab under their wise wings was a fellow Najdi, Abdullah bin Ibrahim bin Saif al-Shamri. It's thought that Ibn Ibrahim inculcated within Ibn AbdulWahhab a desire to acquire the works of Ibn Taymiyyah. He certainly made a great impression upon his Najdi neighbor, as we note in the following anecdote.
I was with him one day when he said to me, "Do you desire that I show you the weapons I have prepared for Majma?"
Majma being a town in Najd 100 plus miles northwest of Ibn AbdulWahhab's own hometown of Uyayna.
I said, "Yes." So he entered me into a place of his which contained a great many books, and said, "This is what I've prepared for it."
The knowledge within his library was his weapon. This is one of 3 oft-repeated anecdotes which gives us some insight into the early formative period of Ibn AbdulWahhab's biography, encounters that would leave indelible marks on the mind of the young Imam and prepare him for the major role he was to play in the intellectual history of Islam. and Ibn Ibrahim benefited Ibn AbdulWahhab beyond the bibliothèque. He also introduced young Sheikh Muhammad to an older Sheikh Muhammad, one who would have the single greatest impact on him of any scholar. That scholar was the Indian powerhouse Muhammad Hayat Sindhi. Sindhi was a major muhaddith. He was affiliated with the Naqshbandi Sufi tariqah, yet well regarded for objecting to shirki folk religion and repudiating innovations. He was a Hanafi, madhaban, but one who called for the restoration of ijtihad against the Taqleed's stifling limitations. These noble concerns Sindhi inculcated within Ibn AbdulWahhab, which is why he would hone his focus on reviving the true meaning of Tawheed, on rejecting blind following or Taqleed, and to source from the Quran and Sunnah exclusively authentic Islamic practice and a pure Sunni creed. We get a sense of how Sindhi steered his young apprentice from our second anecdote in the shaping of Ibn AbdulWahhab's world-shaping career to come. Witnessing the people supplicating at the burial place of the Prophet and asking from him aid, Sindhi was asked by his student,
"What do you say about these?"
To which Sindhi recited,
إن هؤلاء متبر ما هم فيه وباطل ما كانوا يعملون.
Verily, these people will be destroyed for that which they are engaged in, and all that they are doing will be in vain.
Seeking intercession from a saint. You know, a lot of the Sufi orders, most of them have their saints, and a common belief is that you can go to their tombs and pray to them, and they will intercede for you with God, or intercede for you with Muhammad, or you can pray to Muhammad and he'll intercede for you with God. Well, that elevates them to something approaching the status of God, so that would be not allowed.
Sometime after his studies at Medina, Ibn AbdulWahhab returned to Uyayna. In 1741, after his father AbdulWahhab died, Sheikh Muhammad set about on a mission for the restoration of Islamic monotheism, calling the people of Arabia back to an understanding of Tawheed, unpolluted from syncretic creeds, and to the exclusive worship of Allah, decoupled from innovated deeds. His first point of call was Basra, where he studied Arabic grammar and fiqh and furthered his hadith studies. From Basra, he hoped to continue on to Damascus in search of further knowledge. While in Basra, Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab penned his first draft of Kitab al-Tawheed and began publicly preaching what he had penned. This is where we get our third anecdote, a telling lesson from his earliest efforts in championing Tawheed, putting into practice what he had wrought.
During his stay in Basra, he would denounce what he saw and heard of shirk and innovations, surprising some people, and they were amazed at what they witnessed of the sternness of his forbidding the worship of the righteous and saints, and to what sell through them, and the occurrences at their graves. They'd say, if what this man says is true, then the people have not been upon anything for quite some time.
His da'wah got a less than warm reception, and so he was forced to leave Iraq, eventually making his way to Huraymila, where Ibn AbdulWahhab's father had been resident scholar. There, Ibn AbdulWahhab revised Kitab al-Tawheed whilst teaching his lessons to the locals. The Sheikh would admonish the townsfolk against common crime, as Huraymila was something of a haven for robbers and bandits. Some of the criminals didn't take too kindly to his preaching and gathered to murder him at his residence. Ibn AbdulWahhab was thus forced to flee Huraymila too. The Sheikh landed in Uyayna, his hometown, where the ruler, Uthman bin Muammar, offered to support him and his call. With Ibn Muammar's backing, Ibn AbdulWahhab set about changing evil with the hand, so to speak, levelling shrines and preventing sacrificing at graves, and so on. Famously, Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab travelled to the town of Jubail, where along with Ibn Muammar, they demolished the dome over the grave of Zayd bin al-Khattab, brother of the companion Umar ibn al-Khattab. Some of the ignorant worshippers were surprised that Ibn AbdulWahhab was not struck down with divine wrath for disturbing their shrine, which kind of validated his actions in the first place. Due to his activity at Uyayna, Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab gained many supporters as well as opponents. Notably, the promiscuous ruler of Ahsa and Qatif, one Sulaiman bin Muhammad bin Ghurayr of the tribe of Banu Khalid, was incensed that Ibn AbdulWahhab gave in to an adulteress's insistence on her punishment. The enforcements of Sharia sent ripples throughout Najd, antagonizing those who saw themselves as above the law. Refutations of Ibn AbdulWahhab began to be penned, but for Ahsa Sulaiman bin Muhammad, Refutations were not enough.
The religious enforcer that you've with you,
Suleiman threatened Ibn Muammar.
We've heard such and such about him. So either you kill him, or else we cut off the tax tribute due to you. That's with us.
After a while, Ibn Muammar just began to doubt and didn't realize this seems too fanatic and whatnot. And so Ibn AbdulWahhab took refuge with Ibn Saud, right?
Wrong.
Ibn AbdulWahhab's leaving Uyayna was not due to any doubts against his da'wah, but Suleiman's real-life death threat, the gravity of which Ibn Muammar relayed to Ibn AbdulWahhab.
This Emir has written to us, and it doesn't sit right with us that we kill you. And we fear this Emir and are unable to fight him. So, if you deem it prudent that you depart from us, then do so.
Being forced to quit his hometown proved most fortuitous for Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab. Two of the Sheikh's students invited him to hide out in their nearby hometown of Diriyah. The ruler of Diriyah was Muhammad bin Saud, the original NBS. Muhammad bin Saud knew Ibn AbdulWahhab was a marked man and didn't want to bring any trouble to his doorstep. So it appeared as though Muhammad bin Saud was about to send Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab upon his way too, but for the intervention of the Emir's wife, Mudi bin Sultan Abu Ahtan. Mudi bin Sultan was a very smart and pious woman. She had heard of Ibn AbdulWahhab's da'wah and felt he should be supported and honoured.
Indeed, Allah has brought this man to you, and he is a treasure. So enrich yourself with what Allah has specified for you.
Woman's intuition.
More than that, in fact, Mudi's eldest son, Abdulaziz, was already a disciple of Ibn AbdulWahhab. Her brother-in-law was similarly supportive of the Sheikh, so by encouraging her husband to support him too, she was ensuring a cohesion within her household that would emanate at the level of state.
Smart woman.
So instead of Ibn AbdulWahhab going to Muhammad bin Saud to seek his permission to remain in Diriyah, the Emir instead went to the Sheikh and said to him,
Glad tidings of a land better than yours, and of honour and strength.
Strength and honour.
Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab responded,
And I give you glad tidings of honour, establishment, and a manifest victory. And this is the word of Tawheed which the messengers called to, all of them. So whosoever takes hold of it and acts upon it and aids it, will reign over the country and the common worshippers. And you see that all of Najd and its regions have embraced shirk and ignorance, factionalism and differing, and fighting one another. So I hope that you be a leader whom the Muslims unite upon, and your descendants after you.
This brief exchange between the two Muhammads, Ibn AbdulWahhab and Ibn Saud, is what became known as Ahd al-Diriyah, the Pact of Diriyah. For the ruler of Diriyah embraced the young Sheikh and his da'wah and offered his sword to defend it. Thus, in 1744, 3 years in, Ibn AbdulWahhab's preaching mission took on a much more muscular dimension. He was now able to call for the restoration of Tawheed with assertive political state support, as far as an oasis settlement can be called a state. From here, Ibn AbdulWahhab sent letters around Najd. Thalathatul Usul began arriving at every home in the region, and Kitab al-Tawheed was also doing the rounds. Pretty soon, Diriyah became a centre of learning, as many students came to study under Ibn AbdulWahhab, under Ibn Saud's protection.
كانت أيضا الدرعية فيها حركة علمية
ما في شك
وأمير الدرعية القوي في وقتها الإمام محمد بن سعود شجع الحركة العلمية.
ما في شك ازدهرت يعني نعم. كانت الحركة العلمية في العيينة وفي أشيقر ثم ازدهرت بقوة في الدرعية. نعم.
Such an environment also vitalizes the economy and generates wealth, of course. Ibn Muammar wanted back in, so he requested Ibn AbdulWahhab return to Uyayna with the offer once again of support. But Ibn AbdulWahhab was bound by his pact and declared that he wouldn't now abandon Diriyah after Muhammad bin Saud had stuck his neck out for him. Uyayna's loss was Diriyah's gain, as the Saudi emirate grew strong until very soon Uyayna and even Ahsa would come under its authority. Diriyah's rivals were now greatly concerned. It was apparent to many that the religion they had been tolerating, the innovated shrine veneration, the dead in their graves deification, idolatrous incantation, was a drastically different deen to that which the Wahhabis were living by. They feared Ibn AbdulWahhab on two accounts, the da'wah and the political power. So the people conspired to take down Diriyah, forging hostile alliances with all those towns in Najd that had not yet aligned with the Wahhabis. The nastiest of their opponents was the Ham bin Dawas, the Emir of Riyadh. He initiated hostilities against Diriyah by attacking its satellite town, Manfuha, in 1746. This was the first active war in the Wahhabi story, and one where they were not the aggressors. Urayara, in the Greater Ahsa area, also incited the eastern provinces against Diriyah. The anti-Wahhabi coalition also included the Shia of Najran in southern Arabia. So with Riyadh from their west, Urayara from their east, and Najran to their south, the Wahhabis were pincered by a Quburi Shi'i tripartite alliance, each member of which was individually more powerful than Diriyah. The Axis demanded that Ibn AbdulWahhab and his students be handed over, or Diriyah destroyed. The Wahhabis affirmed that they would defend their land, their creed and their people with jihad, a defensive jihad against an invading army of polytheists. The Wahhabis deemed those who attacked them polytheists on the basis of their enmity to the Dawah to Tawheed.
To this day, we have not fought anybody except in defense of ourselves and our women. They are the ones who came to us in our lands and left us no choice, but that we fight them by way of retaliation.
وَجَزَاءُ سَيِّئَةٍ سَيِّئَةٌ مِثْلُهَا.
And the recompense for an evil is an evil the like thereof.
The jihad against Riyadh would last decades. The city was finally and decisively taken in 1773. With no serious challenge left in Najd, a domino effect kicked in, and the whole of Al-Arid was quickly won over to the Wahhabi state. For the first time since Abbasid times, Najd was united under one ruler. Even so, the Sharifs of Makkah were not impressed. Diriyah's rise and the magnetic pull of Ibn AbdulWahhab's call threatened their stranglehold on Islam's sacred sanctuary, where the more unscrupulous of the Sharifs would leverage the Hajj industry for personal advantage. As early as 1733, Ibn AbdulWahhab had sent 30 preachers to Makkah's Sharif, requesting permission for pilgrimage. The Sharif at the time, Mas'ud bin Sa'id, and his Qadi, his chief magistrate, accused the Wahhabi party of heresy and imprisoned them. 16 years later, in 1749, when another Wahhabi Hajj caravan entered the Meccan sanctuary, presumably after having been granted permission, Mas'ud again seized and imprisoned them. That same year, the Sharif wrote to the then Sultan in Constantinople, Mahmud I, to complain about Ibn AbdulWahhab. Now at last, the Ottomans entered the story. This was the response the Meccan chief received the following year, in 1750, from the Ottoman Emperor.
This is an order to the current Emir of Makkah al-Mukarramah, Sharif Masud. May he be granted lasting happiness. Indeed, a man upon an evil path has appeared in Oyena, one of the villages in Najd to the east, and he has drawn delusive deductions in opposition to the four madhabs, and has spread misguidance and incitement towards them. And based upon your notifying us in your previous suggestions, it's incumbent upon you to hasten to rebuke and threaten the aforementioned mischief maker and his followers, in accordance with the pure law, and to steer them towards the right path. But if they insist on their cursed way, then it's incumbent upon you to implement the divinely ordained mandatory legal punishments. And I have issued to you, O Sharif of Makkah, this command of mine in writing. And when you informed the high state,
i.e. of the Ottoman Sultanate,
in your letters to the abode of happiness,
Constantinople,
when you informed us of your need for support and assistance due to the establishment of the atheist,
meaning Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab,
through his gaining to his side the residents of those regions via every trick, such that it was not possible to approach those parties. For the dereliction of duty in regards this aforementioned person,
Ibn AbdulWahhab,
will lead to the appearance of a need for numerically greater forces to fight him. Our Sultanic, imperial command has been issued in specific consideration of your march against this person, and to eviscerate him. For harming him with the sword of the Sharia and purifying the Holy Land is enough punishment for them, as well as being a religious duty.
So the Ottoman Sultan declared Ibn AbdulWahhab an atheist to be admonished, and if he didn't heed, annihilated. This should be borne in mind as we learn how the Wahhabis began to clash directly with Ottoman interests during the subsequent reign of Selim III and beyond. The Ottomans in this sense drew first blood. By imperial writ, they ordered the subjugation of the Wahhabis as disbelievers and the destruction of the Dariyan Emirate whilst it was still fending off attacks from its opponents within Najd. That same year, in 1750, Uthman bin Muammar was killed by Wahhabi zealots, apparently.
Ibn Afaliq wrote a treatise in which he refuted Najdi theology. He criticized Ibn AbdulWahhab as being a takfiri fanatic, and he started writing letters to Ibn Muammar. And Ibn Muammar begins to change his ideas and start doubting what is going on. And this doubting, vacillating between Ibn AbdulWahhab and Ibn Afaliq was enough to consider him to be murtad. And so, this is unbelievable, in Rajab of 1163 Hijrah, that group of renegades, they stalked and they attacked Ibn Muammar after Salat al-Jumu'ah, and they executed him in the masjid after Salat al-Jumu'ah, believing that he is a pagan, mushrik, murtad. And the books of Najdi history revel and embrace and praise that they killed the murtad, and they, the deen Allah Azza wa Jal was, helped and whatnot.
YQ has taken a few facts and embellished them, as he does, to script for us a story as fictitious as the town of Balamori.
What's the story in Balamori? Wouldn't you like to know? What's the story in Balamori? Tell us where we will go.
Ahsa's hard-headed Hanbali scholar, Muhammad ibn Afaliq, had been expending great effort into trying to turn Ibn Muammar into a turncoat, corresponding with him at length in very lengthy correspondence, hoping to convince the Emir of Uyayna to switch sides and join the anti-Wahhabi Riyadh-Ahsa axis of innovation. But Ibn Muammar was not for turning. In response to Ibn Afaliq's taunts that Ibn AbdulWahhab was opposing Islamic scholarship, Ibn Muammar countered,
"Indeed, Ibn AbdulWahhab does not have with him except the books of the people of knowledge."
And he would insist that the Tawheed that Ibn AbdulWahhab revived in the Najd was but the truth. In fact, Ibn Muammar would dare Ibn Afaliq to come to Diriyah with all his doubts if he was so sure of the Shaykh al-Tariyah's deviation. Moreover, Ibn Muammar would continue to lead armies in battle against the anti-Diriyan axis. We simply do not have any evidence whatsoever to substantiate YQ's supposition that Ibn Muammar wavered from Wahhabism, at least as far as the theology was concerned.
And this is the irony. These details are not found in the books of the enemies. They're found in the first Najdi historians that are writing as praise. They're writing from within the tradition,
No, we don't know that.
The details Dr. Qadi is recalling aren't found anywhere, at least not in the overly sinister way he'd be trying to portray. Okay, that was level 1, for the beginner level.
Basically at the high school level.
Now for level 2, the intermediate level students.
Let's say undergraduate level.
Where Ibn Muammar does appear to have wobbled was regards his political obligations to Diriyah. And here, we do well to note the following 3 points. Firstly, ever since Uthman bin Muammar accepted Ibn AbdulWahhab's da'wah, he attracted resentment within and beyond his city, whether regional strongmen such as Riyadh's Daham bin Dawas, or religious men such as Ahsa's Ibn Afaliq. There had been no let-up in schemes aimed at driving a wedge between Diriyah and Uyayna. For example, at a time when Diriyah was fighting to defend herself against the existential threats posed by her enemies, Ibn Muammar hosted their emirs, Riyadh's Daham bin Dawas and Tharmada's Ibrahim al-Anqari, hoping to reconcile them to the da'wah. Ibn Muammar was insistent that Ibn AbdulWahhab attend too, but in a sneaky move, the anti-Wahhabi schemers warned the Sheikh that he would not be welcome to the summit of the 3 city-states. That was in 1747. Ibn Muammar subsequently briefed Ibn AbdulWahhab and continued to stand by Diriyah. However, that he was communicating with the enemy at all was enough for mischief makers to spread rumours and sow doubts as to Uyayna's true allegiance. Secondly, it's been suggested that Ibn Muammar was becoming increasingly frustrated with the agitation of zealots in his own town, sticking their noses in his business. From Uthman's standpoint, he was Prince Sovereign, the first to have aided the Najdi da'wah to Tawheed and to have stuck his neck out for its da'i. He was not to be treated by his own subjects as if he was their subordinate, as if they had the whip hand over him. Thirdly, matters would not have helped when Ibn Muammar was a no-show to battles that he would have ordinarily commanded front and centre. Thus Ibn Muammar's wariness, if that's what it was, and we're trying to be charitable here, Ibn Muammar's wariness, if not apathy, may have been misread as doubt, if not disloyalty, at the precise time when the order of the day was for steadfastness and certainty. Ibn AbdulWahhab's response was to address a visiting delegation from Uyayna, saying,
I want that you pledge allegiance to the religion of Allah and His Messenger, and loyalty to whoever is loyal to it, and hostility to whoever fights and opposes it, even if that be your Emir, Uthman.
Now compare the actual wording of Ibn AbdulWahhab's speech to YQ's spin.
What did Ibn AbdulWahhab do? He found some people from within the tribe that didn't like him, and he basically said it is obligatory on you if you love Allah and His Messenger. He emotionally blackmailed them.
Where?
Right? He literally told them, if you understand Tawheed, then your leader is a mushrik murtad.
Where?
And he needs to be executed.
Where the
Shocking. Just shocking.
This is a scholar giving a fatwa that a person is a murtad and should be executed for theology, for heresy.
Yeah, I already said shocking. In any event, whether they needed an excuse or not, one band of men got into a melee with Ibn Muammar at his mosque, and whether it was manslaughter or premeditated murder, the result was the same. The Emir of Uyayna lay slain. True, the chronicler Ibn Ghannam accused Ibn Muammar of conspiring with the enemy,
until he perpetuated in plotting, manifested his hypocrisy, and his affair became exposed. So a group of the people of Tawheed rose to kill him after the Jummah prayer in the mosque.
However, we cannot be blind to the fact that the killing occurred against the backdrop of the tumult of the time. As the highly regarded journalist and historian Sheikh Hamad al-Jasir wrote,
anyone who follows the history of the case of Uthman ibn Muammar can be almost certain that neither Sheikh Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab nor Imam Muhammad bin Saud had any hand in killing that man, and that the matter occurred at a time in which the conditions of the emergent state had not yet stabilized, and the supports of the dawah had not been made firm. And it's known that every movement for social change is accompanied by chaos and a lack of discipline in many of its affairs before it stabilizes. And often, those with personal aims, from the movement's supporters or enemies, will exploit all this to realize their own aims.
When news of the murder reached Ibn AbdulWahhab, he hastened to Uyayna to calm things down. The first time he left Diriyah since landing there in 1744. The Uyaynans, who had been complaining of Ibn Muammar's supposed betrayal, wanted to approve a new ruler, but the Sheikh insisted against their protestations that the Muammar family continue on in control of the city, until Uthman bin Muammar's first cousin, Mishari bin Ibrahim al-Muammar, was appointed Emir over Uyayna. This act could be viewed as evidence of Ibn AbdulWahhab's soft spot for Uthman, despite the latter's alleged disloyalty. Remember, at no point did Uthman bin Muammar reject or denounce the dawah itself. He remained loyal to the creed, just maybe not the cause. Nor should Ibn AbdulWahhab's refraining from punishing Ibn Muammar's murderers be necessarily taken as an approval of their action. Remember how Ali bin Abi Talib dealt with the Khawarij who murdered Uthman bin Muammar's namesake, Uthman bin Affan? He didn't. Not at first anyway. Not while there was a risk of total political collapse. Ibn AbdulWahhab's appointing Mishari al-Muammar as his slain cousin's successor was a recognition of him as his executor. Mishari was to Uthman bin Muammar what Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan was to Uthman bin Affan, if you will. So if revenge was to be taken, if it was to be warranted, and Ibn Muammar was wrongfully accused of treachery, then his cousin, Emir Mishari, was best placed to do something about it. If he didn't, despite being given the power to do so, case closed. Okay, so we addressed Maqtal Uthman bin Muammar for the beginners and intermediate level students. Now for level 3, the advanced level.
Level 3 is really, this is for the actual students.
As we saw, Uthman bin Muammar's killing has been recalled by some as such an immoral event as to have nullified the morality of the Najdi Dawah mission overall. But it was hardly a big drama show. If a chronicler's mention of Ibn Muammar's demise was reliable enough to relay, then the given justification, betrayal, is surely worth relaying and weighing also, no? If we acknowledge that the Emirate of Diriyah was a vibrant, expansionist state in a hostile sea, then state's gonna do what state's gonna do. sanctioning preemptive strikes, especially to stave off future military threats. This is the nature of power politics. You have to crack a few eggs to make an omelette.
You can't make an omelette without breaking some eggs.
That doesn't mean that we, from the comfort of our couches, have to approve of assassinations and what have you, but nor should we be so naive to believe that violence and statecraft don't go hand in hand. Interestingly, the Ibn Muammar clan only increased in power and prestige after Uthman's death. His cousin and heir, Mishari, would go on to lead 2 Wahhabi armies in campaigns on behalf of the Darian Emirate, and Al Saud did Al Muammar another solid. Emir Mishari was wed to a daughter of Imam Muhammad bin Saud, and one of their children, Muhammad bin Mishari Al Muammar, would become ruler over the nascent Emirate of Najd for a period of 2 years during their interregnum, the only non-Saudi ever to approvingly lord over Saudi real estate. And if we've given a disproportionate amount of attention to this one chapter amongst many in the Wahhabi story, it's to illustrate to others that while
you, Yasir, probably know more about
the Najdi Dawah
than I do, but we will now study how to study
that Dawah.
You're such a troll, you know that?
I do. Anyway, the Wahhabis' worries about double-crossing and double-dealing appeared to be well-founded. A couple years after Uthman bin Muammar's murder, Huraymila, another of Diriyah's satellite towns, was seized by anti-Wahhabi forces through a coup. It took an additional 2+ years to retake the town. The conspirators who had seized it were described as mushrikeen, polytheists and apostates for having betrayed the dawah that Ibn AbdulWahhab had previously brought them. Defensive jihad would again be invoked in 1764, when the Shia of Najran invaded Wahhabi country and handed them a great defeat. The Najdis lost some 400 or 500 men to the Najranis. The following year, they lost their emir too. Muhammad bin Saud died in 1765. And before he did, according to Turkish historians,
hatta vefatından kısa bir süre önce oğulları Abdullah ve Abdülaziz'i çağırarak Osmanlı Devleti ile iyi geçinmelerini ve hiçbir zaman devletin dikkatlerini çekecek aykem davranışlarda bulunmamalarını tavsiye ettiği rivayet edilmektedir.
Of the 2 princes, Muhammad bin Saud was succeeded by his eldest, Abdulaziz. A son-in-law of Ibn AbdulWahhab, Abdulaziz bin MBS was a deeply religious man who combined the role of emir and eventually imam too. The best defense is offense, as the saying goes, and as Imam Emir, Abdulaziz now looked to expand. His Wahhabis accepted the enmity of those who resisted their dawah to Tawheed and declared them mushrikeen, polytheists, and fought them on that basis. Fast forward to 1781 and Qasim is subdued. Fast forward a further 5 years and the Qasimis, now as Wahhabis, marched northwards to subdue Ha'il. And so, 4 decades into his mission, Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab's dawah had come to fruition. The hearts of the Najd had turned to Tawheed through benevolent preaching and admonition, while their towns had been turned over to Banu Saud through diplomacy, warfare and attrition. As for those beyond the Najd who had not yet attacked their emirate, the Najdis corresponded with them cordially, as fellow believers. The ban on the Wahhabis from performing Hajj remained, but Ibn AbdulWahhab still addressed Makkah's authorities as Muslims, albeit Muslims in need of reforming and returning to true practice. The Shaykh understood that the Hijaz's rulers were being deceived by wicked scholars in their midst, and so continued to appeal to the Ashraf directly. In 1771, Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab and Abdulaziz bin MBS wrote to Sharif Ahmed bin Said,
From Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab to the eminent scholars in Allah's sacred land, may Allah through them grant victory to the Master of humanity.
The Prophet Muhammad,
upon him be the best of prayers and peace, and to the followers of the eminent Imams, peace, mercy and blessings of Allah be upon you.
The Sharif responded positively to the letter, accepted the Najdi's gifts, and requested they send him one of their scholars to explain the Najdi call, which they did. Sharif Ahmed's successor, Surur bin Musaid, did allow the Wahhabis to enter Makkah, but on condition they pay a pilgrimage tax that had previously been required of Shiites. Understandably, the Najdis saw this as an affront and harassed the roads leading into the Hijaz. Surur interpreted these military moves as the beginnings of a plan to invade the lands of the Haramain. So in 1776, he appealed to Constantinople for assistance, The Ottoman Sultan at this time was Abdulhamid I. Abdulhamid consulted his governors in Baghdad, Mosul, Damascus and Jeddah, the latter reporting that his Meccan neighbor, Surur, had exaggerated the threat against their territory. Does Jeddah's downplaying concerns of an impending Wahhabi storm from the east suggest that the Red Sea port had secretly answered the Najdi call? Perhaps. More frustrating for the anti-Wahhabi war party would have been the response that came from the governor of Damascus, Muhammad Pasha al-Adham. He reported to Sultan Abdulhamid I that Ibn AbdulWahhab was no threat, as he was no tribal leader, but a busy teacher, and was known personally to the good people of Damascus, among whom he had studied and among whom he enjoyed a good reputation. The Pasha's positive appraisal of Ibn AbdulWahhab disturbed Ottoman historians sufficiently enough for them to claim that the good opinion of Ibn AbdulWahhab was constructed retrospectively after the Sheikh had dispatched one of his students to Damascus to paint a more favourable image of his teacher. Either way, he must have left a very good impression on the scholars he did meet there for however long he was there. Ibn AbdulWahhab would have endeared himself towards the learned of the Levantines on several levels. He was a Hanbali after all, and Damascus was a vibrant centre of Hanbali learning. He was a great admirer of Ibn Taymiyyah, and Damascus was the city where Ibn Taymiyyah made his name. But the most likely explanation for the pro-Wahhabi appraisal that the Ottoman Sultan received from his provincial governor at Damascus was the vibrant Salafist school of Syria. We've already cited, by way of example, the Aleppan scholar Sana'ullah al-Halabi denouncing the shirk of shrine religion, but Halabi, remember, was but one of a long and distinguished line of Ottoman Hanafi scholars to have railed against the cult of saints and other such grave innovations. The touch paper that ignited the fire within these scholars to set the house of Islam alight and aright was the writings of Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim. When the Ottomans overran the Mamluk Sultanate, the former absorbed the latter's Islamic lands along with their libraries. It was only a matter of time before Taymiyan and Jawziyan teachings would take their rightful place in the private collections of Ottoman ulama. Their writings resonated strongly with the scholars already repulsed by the excesses of the Sufi orders and their dervishes' discord. One of these scholars, who we introduced previously, was Muhammad al-Ustawani al-Dimashqi al-Hanafi. Ustawani followed Ibn Taymiyyah's books to the Ottoman imperial court a few centuries later, where he became the Padishah Sheikhi, personal Imam to Sultan Mahmud IV, and preacher to his palace guard. With the Sultan's support, Ustawani supervised the institution of Hispa, or the public duty of the policing of Islamic ethics in society, an institution that's encapsulated by the Quranic imperative of Al-Amru bil-Ma'ruf wa Nahyu anil Munkar, enjoining the good and forbidding the evil.
يا بني أقم الصلاة وأمر بالمعروف وانه عن المنكر واصبر على ما أصابك إن ذلك من عزم الأمور.
Practically, this meant the physical eradication of the totems of shirk within the Ottoman Empire, just as Ibn Taymiyyah had attempted to do in the Mamluk Empire, but with the broad backing of the state in a manner that had eluded Ibn Taymiyyah for most of his career. Ibn Taymiyyah's Ottoman readers traded his characteristic Hanbali hilm, forbearance, for Hanafi harshness and forcefulness. The mystical orders were given cease and desist orders, to repent from the major kufr they were accused of, and to re-enter into Islam, or else. And when, in 1656, the communal tensions in Constantinople became too great for the Sublime Porte to take, Ustawani was made to resettle back in his native Syria, where he took up teaching at the Grand Umayyad Mosque of Damascus. After Ustawani's death, his son Mustafa became head teacher at the same vaunted venue and continued his father's program of preaching a puritanical purge of polytheism. Now, amongst Ustawani's students was AbdulWahhab Muhammad bin Abdul Baqi al-Ba'ali al-Hanbali. AbdulWahhab described his teacher, Ustawani, saying,
كان آمرا بالمعروف ناهيا عن المنكر ناسكا عابدا.
But AbdulWahhab was not short of his own academic accolades either. So learned a scholar was he, in fact, that he was regarded as a scholar among scholars, the Sheikh al-Mashayikh of his time. We don't know if Ibn AbdulWahhab encountered any alumni from the class of AbdulWahhab in Damascus, but we do know that while studying in Medina, he took ijazah from 3 of them. One of the 3 we already introduced, the Majma-born Muhaddith Abdullah bin Ibrahim bin Saif al-Shamari al-Najdi, the man with the plan to wage a war of knowledge with an armory that was his private library. So we got Ibn AbdulWahhab learning directly from and being accredited by men who studied in Damascus under Shaykh al-Islam Abul Mawahib al-Hanbali, the same Abul Mawahib who had been a student of Muhammad al-Ustawani, the same Ustawani who had been the Shaykh to Sultan Mahmud I. Thus, through the aforementioned associations of Muhaddithin from the Damascene Salafi scene and their connection with the Hadith circles in the city of As-Sadiq al-Amin, these associations not only shaped the mission of Ibn AbdulWahhab, but also helped spoil Sharif Surur's mission to have the Ottomans assist with a military intervention on behalf of the Meccan bossman against Diriyah's ascension. Surur was succeeded as Sharif by his brother Ghalib bin Musaid. In 1789, Ghalib wrote to Abdulaziz bin MBFs requesting clarity of the Najdi call. So Ibn AbdulWahhab wrote back to Ghalib, addressing him and the scholars and the people of Makkah, ulama fi bilad al-haram, as Muslims, and this was despite those scholars having made takfir of the Wahhabis and blocked them. Very early into Ibn AbdulWahhab's mission, his Najdi opponents schemed against him, impressing upon Hijaz's ulama that he was a dangerous deviant. By 1743, they succeeded in convincing Makkah's clerical class to sign a condemnation of the Shaykh, wherein
one or two of the clerics declared Ibn AbdulWahhab of unsound mind, and several urged those in authority to hunt him down and kill him.
Tellingly, however,
no cleric based in Medina, where Ibn AbdulWahhab had studied, signed the condemnation.
Makkah scholars must have had a great effect in filling Ghalib with hatred for the Najdi da'wah, as in 1790, the warmongering turned to actual war when Ghalib launched a preemptive attack against the Najdis. He was hoping to destroy Diriyah's forces before they could grow strong enough or bold enough to march on the Hijaz. He failed. The tribes of Western Arabia that had been allied to the Sharif were looking eastwards. The Najdi Dawah and Diriyah's dynamism was too compelling.
I can describe with more accuracy, having myself resided in that country while the war continued. The Wahhabis had for nearly 30 years established their doctrines, made numerous proselytes, and successively conquered Najd and subdued most of the great Bedouin tribes, who feed their cattle there in the spring, and retreat afterwards to the desert. Yet war had not been declared, nor did the Wahhabis encroach upon the rights of the two governments nearest to them, that of Baghdad on the north, and that of Hijaz towards the south. The pilgrim caravans passed from Damascus and from Baghdad without any molestation through their territory. Their increase in power, and the assiduity with which they propagated their doctrines, seems first to have excited the jealousy of Sharif Ghalib. Ghalib, who was then in regular correspondence with the Porte, and received every year the pilgrim caravan, left no means untried for prejudicing the Turkish government against his enemies. He represented them as infidels, and their behavior towards the Turkish Hajis, or pilgrims, did not remove this unfavorable opinion.
By their behavior towards the Turkish Hajis, Burkhardt is explaining how Amir Abdulaziz bin Saud prevented from entering Medina Hajj caravans that were under armed Ottoman guard and who denounced their arrival with musical revelry. Unarmed pilgrims, however, were allowed to pass and continue on to Mecca. The music the Wahhabis deemed inappropriate, the armed entourage an affront to their political sovereignty. Moves resented not just by the Wahhabis.
Every ruling Sharif appreciated that the annual Ottoman pilgrimage Hajj caravans amounted to a military reinvasion of the Hijaz. The Ottomans could always replace him with a more malleable member of his disputatious clan. Ruling Sharifs therefore tended to be more amenable to Ottoman direction before the Hajj, and at their most independent once the Hajj caravans had departed.
Ghalib and Hijaz's leaders did petition Constantinople for military aid against the rising Wahhabi power, but attacked without waiting for Constantinople's green light. It mattered little, as the new Ottoman Sultan, Selim III, was unresponsive, indifferent even. Selim III was a very capable administrator, if not a far-sighted one. Although he dabbled in mysticism, to his credit he did strive, though ultimately fail, to curb the consumption of alcohol amongst his Muslim subjects. He also tried to permanently roll back the rebellious streak within the Ottoman army. Indeed, he would meet his end by sword strike, delivered to him by mutinous soldiery, the only Ottoman Sultan to have ever been killed by a long blade. Still, during his ill-fated 8-year reign, he did manage to kickstart some far-reaching reforms significant enough that Selim III's Sultanate marks a watershed moment in Ottoman history between what is known as the Old Regime and the period of modernization. His problem was the empire he inherited had been reduced by his rivals, especially Russia and Austria. With the prestige wielded by the imperial centre greatly bruised, the provinces flexed their mutinous muscles, jostling for ever greater autonomy, their governors' ethno-nationalist ambitions encouraged by scheming international powers. Selim's response was to create an all-new army under direct state control and conscripted from Anatolian Muslim households. He created military academies on western lines and a new fighting force with the latest weapons and drilled in western ways by western officers. This was the Nizami Jadid, New Order, a more fit-for-purpose outfit than the unfit and unruly Yenicheri, the now old and antiquated new force of the Janissaries. Indeed, before he could field his new model army against an external enemy, he was forced to deploy them against the internal threats of the Janissaries. As was customary, the Ottoman Sultan would consult his council of scholars and advisors on how to respond to the cries for help coming out of the Hijaz. But the council could not reach a consensus on action. While one group of scholars were adamant the Najdis be destroyed for daring to threaten the Hijaz, another party saw the dispute between the Meccan Sharifs and Diriyah emirs as an inter-Arab turf war unworthy of Turkic meddling. And what was the opinion of the third group, pray tell? The answer is a bombshell. For a party of the Ottoman elite deemed ad-Dawah al-Najdiyah to be the haqq,
What?
rather than fight Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab, these statesmen felt the Sultan should support him, or at least not get in his way. As one group of scholars in the Sultan's court who had returned from visiting the Hijaz said of Ibn AbdulWahhab,
öne sürdüğü fikirlerin esas itibarıyla yanlış olmadığı, mamafih emri bil maruf ve nehyi anil münker, makastıyla faaliyet gösteren kişi için bir şey söylemenin de mümkün olamayacağını.
That's right. Ibn AbdulWahhab's sublime call enjoyed strong support from a body of sympathetic Salafists at the Sublime Porte.
When you're writing history or reading history, you're basically wading through a deepening swamp. You're sinking in on top of your ankles, then up to your knees, and then heaven help you, up to your thighs, and you're in danger of being sucked right in by history. And it's a swamp. There's no firm ground once you've left the shore until you come to these documents, which are top state secret.
The existence of a pro-Wahhabi Ottoman wing has been acknowledged in the chronicles of the most influential Ottoman scholar of the 19th century, Ahmad Jawdat Pasha. But Jawdat Pasha was himself no fan of
Şeyh-i Necdi.
As he scornfully referred to Ibn AbdulWahhab, he agreed with the Ottoman courtiers at the time who held that
Ashab fil gibi Mekke Mukkarram'ı tahrip etmek fikri taşıyan bir kişinin harıcı olduğunda şüphe olmayıp te'dip edilmesi gerektiğini,
Jawdat Pasha was equally scornful of his predecessors at the palace for failing to counsel the sultans against the Wahhabi threat. Compiling his chronicles of the Ottoman Empire whilst in the service of Sultan Abdul Hamid II,
Ahmad Jawdat Pasha
blamed Ottoman inaction, stymied as it was by a pro-Najdi faction, for essentially allowing the Najdi da'wah to spread unchecked until it gave rise to an empire of its own that would soon gain international traction. Still, we're grateful at least for
Ahmad Jawdat Pasha's
frank admission that a group of Ottoman statesmen whose counsel Selim III had sought cautioned the Sultan that Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab was not to be fought because those Turks believed in what he taught. This history, an almost secret history, has been hiding from us non-Turks in plain sight until we, by Allah's permission, have had it translated and brought to light. Not only does this prove that Ottoman sultans could at times rely upon sincere advisors, but that Salafist staffers were still a thing in the Topkapi Palace's eastern equivalent to the US White House's West Wing. In 1792, a couple of years after the Najdis repelled the Meccan aggressors, Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab died. The occasion of the Sheikh's death is where we too will close this chapter on the Wahhabi-Ottoman story. But before we sign off, let's take stock of the story so far and consider the implications of what we've brought with the following parting thought. The narrative claiming Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab led a rebellion against the Ottoman Empire is a false one. It's a plank that is pushed, not least by Arab and Turkish chauvinists, to perpetuate animosity between their constituencies so as to keep the Ummah divided in the service of nationalism. What is evident is that unscrupulous individuals within the Ottomans' coastal Arabian vassal states in Mecca and Ahsa felt threatened by the mission of Ibn AbdulWahhab, a mission which the Sheikh's fans will argue was egalitarian and reformative and towards a Tawheed-focused faith, restorative. Ibn AbdulWahhab's enemies tried very hard to poison their audience and the Ottoman authorities against the Sheikh and his da'wah, presenting him as a false prophet, an antichrist and a Kharijite. However, despite the anti-Wahhabi forces' best-worst efforts, Ottoman scholars and statesmen in Jeddah, Medina, Damascus and crucially Constantinople at the imperial court of the Sublime Porte itself ultimately succeeded in dissuading the Ottoman state from marching against Muhammad ibn AbdulWahhab and the sanctuary-giving Diriyan Emirate. The decision to let the Najdis be was aided by elements of the Ottoman Ahl al-Halli wal-Aqd, who refused to underwrite fatwa against Ibn AbdulWahhab, while others of the Khan's council openly declared their support for him. And as we will soon see, while some extreme Sufis at first failed to convince the Sultan to make war upon Diriyah, their warmongering would eventually pay off with help from the Shia. That phase of heightened hostilities was to come after Ibn AbdulWahhab's death, as it was after the passing of their Sheikh that the Emirate of Diriyah looked to expand, to carry the da'wah into the lands that had played their hostile hands, the Shia to their north and east, and the Ashraf to their west. And it's there, Allah willing, where we'll head next.
وأعوذ من جهمية عنها عتت بخلاف كل مؤول مرتاب والاستواء فإن حسبي قدوة فيه مقال السادة الأنجاب الشافعي ومالك وأبي حنيفة وابن حنبل اتقي الأواب وبعصرنا من جاء معتقدا به صاحوا عليه مجسم وهابي جاء الحديث بغربة الإسلام فهل يبكي المحب لغربة الأحباب فالله يحمينا ويحفظ ديننا من شر كل معاند سباب ويؤيد الدين الحنيف بعصبة متمسكين بسنة وكتابه لا يأخذون برأيهم وقياسهم ولهم إلى الوحيين خير مآب